Welcome everybody to Simplified. My name is Michael.
And I'm Gurjot.
This is episode 6.
In this episode, we met Professor Manu Kapur, whose research focuses on something called productive failure.
It's a way of learning that enables us to learn faster. Basically, we take problems that we cannot solve, we try to solve them before we actually are told
the concept.
Before we learn the concept.
The idea is simply to fail before you actually learn.
So let's find out how you can fail more to learn more.
I'm sorry. Like that. Let's just get on with it. Professor Kapur, thank you so much for joining us. And we saw that you have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and now you study how people learn. Could you join the dots for us? How did you get from that to that?
Well, it was not something that was planned for. It was more life experiences where life takes you. So I started out as an engineer, but by the time I was done with engineering, I wanted to do more with something with humans. I started teaching for a while, and then once I started teaching, I got interested in the problems of human cognition and learning, and then I decided to sort of take that up, and here I am, investigating the sciences of learning.
Does your education as a mechanical engineer affect the way you think now, doing research on education?
Yeah, a lot of the training of mechanical engineers is very analytical in nature. You become very strong analytical persons. You also engage in a lot of design, so engineers don't just sit around with theory. They like to build things, they like to design things. So I think that's sort of a disposition towards taking some basic mechanisms and then saying, okay, how can we build something with it? How can we design something with it? Is an important disposition that I bring to my work. Much like we know from research the basic mechanisms of learning, but you need really an engineer to take those and design it. Much like you can have the laws of physics or laws of mathematics, but you need an engineer to build a car out of it or a building out of it or something out of it, right? So there is that disposition of design that is very critical.
Do you think your background in the natural sciences gives you a certain edge compared to other people working in your field who did not come from natural sciences?
I think the question of edge, I would frame it as it brings a new perspective.
Yes.
You know, I think in any complex phenomena that you're investigating, one perspective alone does not give you an edge. You need complementary perspectives to investigate. So if you're looking at learning, you need a design perspective, you need an analytical perspective, you need modeling, you need sociology, cultural psychology. I mean, you need a whole lot of perspectives, and the amazing things start to happen when all of these perspectives come together, which is hard, but when it does, it's really good. Maybe.
So in a way, your goal has always been to just do good work.
Yeah.
And what have been some obstacles to doing good work generally?
In my field, it's a very applied field because we're working for designing learning in actual settings, in actual ecologies of classrooms and schools, also in informal settings. So you have to work with a lot of stakeholders, you know. So just having the science, the scientific basis is not sufficient. You know, I can have all the science in the world, but if I can't work with you, who's running the school or who's running a museum, or if I can work with you, who's a designer, a technological designer, or if I can work with a politician who's going to give the funding, the best ideas would go nowhere. So I think the biggest obstacle, or you can turn it around and say the biggest opportunity, is to bring people together that control the different levers, you know.
Do you also find a change in perspective going from natural sciences into your field? Because in natural sciences, you still have the scope, especially say in mechanical engineering, you have the scope of instant gratification. If you're trying to build a car, the car's ready, you know it's done. But in something like seeing how learning develops in school children, it's a year-long process at the least.
Maybe more, yeah.
Or maybe more.
Yeah.
How do you...
Well, there are two ways to think about it. On one way, you can say that, machines are better behaved than humans.
More controlled system.
It's more predictable, the effects sometimes. Humans are a little bit more,
random.
Random, and And of course, our objective is to try to unpack that randomness, explain. So the level of uncertainty, randomness, complexity, when you're going from machines to humans, of course, increases substantially. One could view that as a big challenge, but also as a great, something that motivates you to solve that, you know, or to work with that. Yeah, that's how I choose to think about it.
Yeah. Could you tell us about your research then? You do something called productive failure.
Yeah.
What is it about?
So the idea is, you know, if you look at, common sort of popular readings, where people say that failure is a stepping stone to success, learning from mistakes and errors is good. Much like people might say, for example, in the sciences, oh, wind has a lot of energy, or light has energy, or heat has energy. The question is, yes, if it all has energy, how do you systematically design and tap it to good use? So in the same way, you can think about failure is a very powerful learning experience. It's one thing to say that. It's quite another, back to the point about engineer. You know, how do you tap that? How do you deliberately use it, design for it, and test and see how, when, and why it works? So my research looks at how, if you're about to learn something new, instead of telling you exactly what to do and how to do it, I design failure-based activation, failure-based systems where you engage in activities which I've designed for you to fail at.
Okay.
But provided you can explore and generate ideas within those activities, you will learn a lot more later on than if I were to just tell you the information or the knowledge. And that's what I call productive failure. It's designing these particular experiences for students when they're about to learn something new.
How come do you learn a lot more? Is it because you're just forced to think about the problem from different angles?
Yeah, so that's so in part how the cognitive system works is it works, you make sense of new information based on what you already know. Now, if I were to just tell you something, it is very hard for you to connect it to what you know.
Mm-hmm.
But if I design failure-based systems, failure-based activities for you, I'm sort of forcing you into parts of your knowledge where you say, maybe it's about this, let me try it. Oh, maybe it's about that, or maybe if I could draw it out, oh no, that still doesn't work. You know, so I'm activating different aspects of what you call different ways of thinking about the problem. And because I've designed these activities for you in a way that you would not be able to get to the correct solution, you know, you not only activate the knowledge, but you also become aware of the limits of your knowledge, you know. And then that has an affective component where you think, okay, I tried this, it does not work, maybe I need to know, maybe I want to find out what is it. So it activates it. It creates, you become aware of what is needed, or that there's a gap, and there's an affect to it that, okay, I want to know what is it. And these are some of the basic mechanisms why failure-based activation works.
Does it have something to do with repetition? Because if you fail, you repeat it, and it's of course you come up with a new perspective of looking at the problem, but does the mere fact that you're repeating it have something to do with it?
So can you say a little bit more? What do you mean by repeating?
So if you have a task and you failed at it once, the next time you try to come up with a different way of approaching that task, and then you fail again and you do it again and again, you're not coming up with a new perspective each time you're trying, but because you have the experience of having done it 10 times before, is that a metric somehow?
Yeah. So the repetition alone would not explain it. I think what really works is when you try to approach the problem from a different perspective. So if you are working within the same perspective and failing, it's going to be harder to learn from that failure. Whereas if you are trying multiple ways of thinking about the problem, then I think that would prepare you to learn a lot better.
How do you really encourage people to think of it in different ways, or give people the tools to think of it?
So part of it is the design of the activity itself, that is designed to activate your intuitive ways of thinking and reasoning. So
could you give us an example?
So a classic example that I give, so suppose students are trying to learn a math concept of, say, standard deviation or something like that. So typically the teacher would come in and explain to you exactly what it is and show you lots of problems to solve and blah, blah, blah. We design these like data sets where we say, oh, here are football players who've scored a number of goals, and your job is really to look at this data set and say, and design as many ways of determining who's the most consistent.
Oh.
So we're not talking about standard deviation, variance, whatever. We just say, okay, you have this data set, can you determine as many ways of who's the most consistent? Now that gives you an access into student way of thinking, which is sort of relevant to what they're going to learn, but the activities are designed to activate your intuitive, informal, as well as your formal knowledge. And to the extent that students can play around with their formal and informal knowledge and ways of thinking, they can generate multiple ways of calculating, drawing, inventing new measures that are never found in textbooks. I mean, that's what my research shows. But none of them actually gets to the correct solution. But that's not the point. The point is that's the preparation. Now that's the experience that prepares them then to learn the mathematical concepts. Yeah.
And then what, subsequently you tell them the concept?
Yes, the teacher can come and say, okay, well, let's look at your ideas and let's discuss what's good and bad about them, or what can be improved about them, and how it connects to the correct sort of concept. And that's when students learn not only what the concept is, but also what it is not, and how some suboptimal solutions, why they're suboptimal, and why incorrect solutions are incorrect. And so that develops a much deeper understanding of what it is that they learned, right? And because they go through this very creative, inventive process of producing ideas, their knowledge is then situated in this process. So when we ask them later on to solve novel problems, they're used to the process of inventing and creating.
Yes.
So you're tackling multiple sort of goals at the same time. It's not just learning about a mathematical concept, it's learning it in a way that you not only learn it deeply, but you're able to transfer and use it creatively later on.
So it's very exploratory.
Initially,
Yes,
yeah. So it's
which is how I think all science was up until, say, the 1800s. If you're trying to look at the sky, like, what is that thing? No one knows what it is, so you just, maybe it's the sun, maybe it's something else.
Yeah, so I mean, that's our initial learning processes are highly inductive in nature. We look for patterns. We have gained a lot of knowledge in the domains, and that is great because of the advanced scientific advancement. But the way it's sort of gone into teaching is that because we have this knowledge now, we should give this knowledge first. And then students can apply that later. Now, that is a tricky proposition. If you were a carpenter or a farmer back in the medieval ages or pre-industrial era, you would not tell your son or daughter, say, okay, before we can build this table, you need to learn about the material science, you need to learn about forces and angles and geometry, and until we do a semester-long course in all these three things, then we can go to the workshop later on.
Yeah.
Right? You would never do that. You would say, come to the workshop, and you learn about forces, about materials, about angles, and how in the activity of doing it itself. So this modern phenomena of putting so much emphasis on knowledge first is like I said, it's a modern thing. It is not the most beneficial for learning. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to design systems which lead to very good knowledge development, but also in ways that you can use that knowledge in productive ways.
As you said, the knowledge of the student is contained in the process. If I understand it correctly, so if I'm a student who went through the process of learning standard deviation by looking at football scores, and later on when I'm thinking about standard deviation, I will remember it as a personal experience where I came up with one way of approaching the problem, but I remember, that didn't work out, but then the teacher said that this is how we do it.
Yeah.
So I have a new memory connection, if you could say.
It's a better network, So if you're thinking of knowledge structures as networks of nodes, information, then you have a more complex network, more well-structured network, and what that does is when you have to use that knowledge, you have multiple parts. I mean, it's a basic consequence of multiple network. Like a stronger network is when you have a stimuli, it has multiple parts in the network to the knowledge. Whereas if you just learn it in the traditional way, you also build a network, but that's not as robust. And it cannot be queued as well. So there we go into the technicalities of cognitive mechanisms, but you're right, that's one of the ways of thinking about it.
When learning through constant failure, which is productive failure, how do you maintain people motivated? I imagine you don't necessarily feel like you're progressing as much as just having a flow of information giving you...
Yeah, so motivation is a tricky beast, you know. It's more of a cultural thing as well. So part of doing productive failure is to make sure the classroom culture supports those norms. So you have to start shifting the expectations and norms and say, well, this is an expected space to be. In fact, if you're getting everything and you're solving everything, don't be too happy, because chances are you're not pushing yourself, you're not learning as deeply. So if we're trying to change how learners view themselves, what learning is and how they are as learners, you know, so that they are always in this zone of where they're not so challenged that they give up, but it is in a zone of struggle where they have to try and do. So it's a way of designing, but it's a way of framing these activities that go beyond just the cognitive act, but it is about who you are and the kind of person we are trying to develop. In the end, you know, we are not trying to get students to know about mathematics. We're trying to build a mathematical thinker, you know, and that's a larger sort of challenge than the knowledge that mathematics has. Yeah.
What's the time scale of your method of pedagogy and the traditional method? Because the problem that we have right now is you have 4 years for a bachelor's, and the system needs to generate workers in 4 years. I'm assuming if you spend so much time on just teaching standard deviations, it takes longer. The knowledge, of course, is better, but it takes longer. Yeah. And maybe the economy doesn't quite want that.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a question of constraints and times and allocation of resources. So there are trade-offs to be designed. So I think one of the ways that I work with systems that have those constraints is to say, well, don't do it for everything. Do it for big concepts, big ideas in your domain. So if you're taking a semester-long course, for example, you may be learning 5 big ideas. That's a lot of ideas, maybe 3 to 5 big ideas.
Yeah.
And if you can design the learning of these ideas in productive failure experiences, then chances are you will learn. Your learning would be a lot deeper, and you'll be able to transfer it. Also, productive failure is not meant for sort of procedural skills or technical skills. It's more meant for conceptual sort of skills, and so that's the initial learning when you first come to understand. Now, if you want to become fluent in it, you also need a lot of practice and a deliberate practice towards mastering a concept. So all that still has to come. This is just about designing the initial learning experience so that you learn that thing deeply.
Is it kind of like building like a general platform to start off your knowledge, to build your knowledge on?
Yeah. We all build new knowledge and prior knowledge, and the extent to which your prior knowledge can be activated and primed in a way that's relevant to learn the new thing, the better you will learn.
Is there a difference in, does your productive failure method work better with, say, young students and not so much with, say, university students? Because university students have already been through 18 years of traditional knowledge building, and they're not quite open to learning new ways.
Yeah. So our experimental evidence actually suggests that it works across the age groups. Whether those age groups like it, we've had cases where people say they don't like it, but they still learn better. Yeah. And so I tell people, look, I'm not in the business of making you happy. I'm in the business of making you learn. So you want your teacher to make you happy? Well, try the next door. If you want your teacher to make you learn, come here. So that's.
Why do you say they're not happy? Because I'm assuming traditional methods aren't that.
Yeah, but you mastered. The thing is, you mastered the game, right? I mean, people who've made it to places like ETH or other, they mastered that game. It worked for them. It does, and it worked very well. And these are smart people, and it worked very well. The question is, could it have worked even better?
Yeah.
And our experiments shows, yes, if you could do this with the people right in the middle of a distribution in terms of abilities and achievement, it works. If you do it people with university students, it still works. So we have enough evidence to say, yes, it works with even very good students who make it to universities. But whether they like it, that's a different issue.
How can we implement productive failure in our own learning here? For example, at university, they give us problem set, and then we give it in, and then 1 week later we get the results.
Yeah.
How could we improve this ourselves within the system that currently exists?
So one simple way to think about this would be, if you are going to a lecture where they're going to teach something new, try and solve but then it's a question of design. So actually you need the teacher, the lecturer himself or herself to design these activities. But just in your own way, try to tackle problems that require the concepts that you're about to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And not focus so much that you're not able to solve those problems, but just try to solve those in whichever ways that you can. And so that's as preparation to get to the lecture. So if you constantly engage yourself in solving problems that require concepts you have not learned yet, but are going to learn, and focusing on just trying different ways, then you will learn from the stuff from the same lecture a lot more than if you were to not do this. Right? Also, I would say ask your lecturers.
In your field of learning and pedagogy, what's the unknown? What's the mystery? Is there something that you know exists but you just don't know why? Or if there's something that you really want to know, if it is a hypothesis that you're trying to...
Yeah. So, learning is incredibly complex. You look, depending on which phenomena or which aspect of learning you look at. So, for example, if one could say, even to take a simple thing like prior knowledge. We all know that prior knowledge is important for learning new things. We disagree. There are debates on how to use that knowledge, because the process by which prior knowledge becomes, you use your prior knowledge to build new knowledge, is up for debate. So we have some macro effects that we know, but process theories about how those things emerge over time are things that we need to build better models of.
Wait, so you mean we know the beginning and we know at the end, but we don't know how we get there?
We have different theories of how we get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you also work with neuroscientists? Because they particularly look at how animals learn, trying to map that onto humans, and you have empirical evidence from humans.
Right, so there is an increasing sort of collaboration with neuroscientists in the field, so that you get, it's layers of explanation. So I can engage students in behavioral experiments and infer something about the cognitive mechanisms. I can engage them in social collaboration and infer something about social mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So just taking it one notch down and saying, okay, beyond the social, cognitive, what is the biological substrate? What is mechanism? What's happening at that level? And these are mechanisms also that happen at multiple timescales. So the neural mechanisms happen at a very short timescales, right? Cognitive mechanisms around knowledge and activation happen at a slightly larger timescale. Social mechanisms are even larger. Cultural mechanisms take a long time. So when you're building a theory of learning, then you have to, most people operate at 1 or 2 levels, 1 plus minus 1. But yes, we have to, if you want to build an explanatory depth to your theory, then you need some kind of a theoretical apparatus that goes across these levels, including the neurosciences.
What would you say are your passions in life?
Oh, my passions in life. Well, I used to love football.
Okay.
My first love was football. I almost became a football player, professional football player, but that didn't work out because I injured myself.
Oh.
Yeah, badly. That was out, and then I became an engineer, which, as I told you, did not work out either.
So you've had productive failure in your life.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the productive part to happen. But yeah.
Is there anything specific you're looking forward to researching about here at ETH?
Yeah, so part of it is to work. What ETH offers is a high level of interdisciplinarity, where learning scientists can work with, biological scientists, neuroscientists, data scientists, computer scientists, engineers. So I think that's one of the most attractive aspects of coming here and starting work programs here. So research I can't predict exactly where the research is going to take, but it's all going to be about learning phenomena. But like I said earlier, exploring it from multiple perspectives.
And you've done a bunch of projects in Singapore and abroad, I'm assuming. Have any of those projects been being used in the long term, or is it just a pilot project and this worked and that's it?
Great question. So in Singapore, because I've spent most of my time in Singapore, we built enough evidence both locally and internationally around productive failure that the government said, okay, let's scale this into the curriculum.
Oh, cool. That's cool.
So Singapore pre-university students, 1/3 of their math curriculum is designed along productive failure. And it takes, so that's an ongoing project. It's still going on. But it shows that, if you keep at it and you keep developing solid evidence and work with stakeholders, which is a very important thing, because science is not just about doing science, but also communicating in ways that shows and makes people believe that this is impact, in a good way. And once you do that, you can impact systems or national systems.
Singapore, I'm assuming, was a low threshold system because you already have. It's a tiny island. You already have high levels of education, and the government is open to doing this stuff rather than, say, I don't know, in the United States or in India, where it's the sheer numbers. At least in India, that's a huge barrier. When you have millions of students graduating from high school every year, you can't quite do this.
When we started in Singapore, it was the same thing. Like, how are you gonna? Instead of thinking of large populations, you start to think about smaller pockets. So find Singapore's within India or United States. There will be districts and pockets where you can do work that. So you start with little pockets of innovation, and when you start doing good work in these pockets, then you try to leverage structures that these pockets have of working together or sharing information, and you slowly the sort of the groundswell happens, and you take it from there. You never start. I mean, I almost never think that I'm going to change the entire country. Or I want to change that part first. Let's create a solid narrative there, and then this part, and then that part, and then let's get together and talk about it so that other people know about it. Then more parts come on board. It's like the wiggle hypothesis. If nobody, instead of making everybody wiggle, or shake, I say, why don't you shake? Why don't you shake? Oh, well, shaking is nice. Okay, I will shake. I will shake too. And suddenly, a lot of people are shaking, and you develop it over time.
Where do you see your research in, say, 10 years, 5 years from now?
Well, I hope we will have deeper understandings of the basic science behind it. I think there's a lot of work to do to understand just what the mechanisms are. I hope we'll also have better process theories, what we talked about, how learning emerges over time, more microgenetic models of how learning unfolds. But I also feel that we need to do a better job at communicating what we're finding. Part of what you're trying to do here in this effort is to communicate to the wider public the nature of our work and how it is important, how it can impact. So ultimately, impact on society is a big thing. So in 5 to 10 years, if we can do that and continue, again, there's no sort of line that you cross and says, I've made an impact. You just always keep doing it.
Yes.
Well, one more question. What's on your bookmarks bar?
What's on my what?
Bookmarks bar. So
What's that?
Yep. In your browser, you have a bookmarks bar that you can put bookmarks.
All right. So I'll have all sorts of things, articles.
Is there a lot, or is there very few?
Well, depends which computer you look at, but it's a range of things, from articles I want to read to sport to news to chats that I'm involved in, and I can't put say this is particularly the case.
Do you still follow football?
I follow football. I watch football.
Do you have a team you support?
Yeah, Manchester United. There you go.
Yes, that was great. Do you have any other questions?
No, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. All the best.
Thank you for listening. If you liked it, we'd really appreciate it if you shared it and gave us your feedback. We publish a new episode every week. For more details, visit our website simplifyd.xyz.